Elena had always believed that family was unbreakable, that the bonds of blood could withstand anything. She had spent her life putting others first, sacrificing her dreams, her ambitions, and often her own happiness, so that her younger sister, Sophia, could thrive. She had been there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every late night panic over exams, and every disappointment Sophia faced. Elena had believed that love like that would be returned in kind, but today, all that faith shattered in a single moment. It began with a phone call from her father's lawyer, an official sounding man whose polite words barely masked the message that cut deeper than any blade. Elena had been cut out of her family's inheritance, the assets she had imagined herself sharing, planning for, dreaming of. They were gone, and not given to a charity, not saved for some future need, handed directly to Sophia. Her sister, radiant in her new engagement, the object of everyone's attention, the perfect golden child who never seemed to face consequences. Elena's hands trembled as she hung up the phone. She felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her. The house that had always felt warm and safe now felt like a cage, every wall closing in with the whispers of her father's disappointment, every photograph of her family mocking her loyalty. She had expected at least a conversation, a chance to defend herself, but there had been none, only a letter, formal and cold, sealing her out of the future she had envisioned as hers. The next blow came at Sophia's wedding. Elena had received the invitation weeks earlier, the envelope thick with gold trim and florid calligraphy. She had thought naively that her family would want her there, even if the inheritance had been lost. But the words of the invitation, though polite, were deliberate in their coldness. Her name was listed at the bottom, almost as an afterthought. She could see it now in her mind, her name, smaller than the rest, tucked beneath the others like an unwelcome shadow. At the wedding, Elena's heart broke anew. She watched Sophia glow in a dress that seemed spun from sunlight, surrounded by family and friends laughing, celebrating, and loving her with the kind of devotion Elena had always dreamed of receiving. Her father's eyes barely acknowledged her presence, her mother's smiles felt rehearsed, and the whispers of cousins and aunts seemed to underline her absence in the family's heart. She was invisible, a ghost haunting the celebration of her sister's joy. After the ceremony, Elena slipped out to the garden, tears stinging her eyes, the cool night air doing little to soothe the fire in her chest. She felt a mix of grief, anger, and disbelief that someone she had loved and trusted could treat her like this. A lifetime of sacrifices had counted for nothing. The world seemed to mock her loyalty, her patience, her devotion. And in that quiet, she made a vow. She would not let their cruelty define her. She would rise above the betrayal, find her own path, and build a life so full, so brilliant, that no one could ignore her again. One day, they would see what they had lost. But for now, Elena just let herself cry, letting the tears fall freely, washing away the illusions of family, leaving only a simmering ember of resolve. Elena left her family behind like a ghost she could no longer haunt. She moved to a bustling city, one that didn't know her history, didn't carry the weight of her betrayal. The first weeks were quiet, painfully so. She wandered the streets like a stranger to herself, carrying a hollow ache in her chest where love and trust had once resided. Nights where the hardest sleep came reluctantly, filled with dreams of Sophia's wedding, her father's cold gaze, and the inheritance that had been wrenched from her. At first, Elena let herself mourn. She cried in her small apartment, letting grief pour from her in waves, staining the walls with invisible marks of loss. But slowly, that grief began to change. She started waking earlier, brushing away the tears and stepping into a new life with deliberate intention. She found a modest job at a marketing firm, where no one knew her as the daughter who had been cast aside, or the sister who didn't deserve love. In this anonymity, Elena discovered something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. With every late night at the office and every small victory, landing a client, completing a project, earning a compliment from a boss, Elena felt her confidence returning. She started to invest in herself, taking classes she had once dreamed of, redecorating her apartment, and even treating herself to little luxuries she had denied herself for so long. She was learning that happiness could be built from within, not granted by others. Then, one rainy evening, fate intervened in the form of James. She had spilled coffee on a stack of documents at a cafe and was frantically trying to salvage them when a tall man with a kind smile offered assistance. His voice was calm, unassuming, yet it carried a warmth she hadn't felt in years. He helped her clean up, offered to replace the ruined papers, and then simply stayed. There was no judgment in his eyes, only genuine concern, and something in Elena stirred. Over time, their paths crossed more often. Coincidence or design, she wasn't sure, and she found herself drawn to him. James was different from anyone she had ever met. He was successful, yes, wealthy even, but it wasn't his money that fascinated her. It was the way he listened, truly listened, without expecting anything in return. He laughed at her jokes, encouraged her dreams, and never made her feel small. Still, Elena struggled with trust. Every time she thought about allowing someone close, she felt the icy sting of her family's betrayal. She wondered if she would ever truly feel safe, if opening her heart again would be worth the risk. But with James, the fear seemed to soften, replaced by a cautious hope she hadn't felt in years. Late at night, lying awake in her apartment, Elena reflected on her journey. Her family had tried to define her worth, to control her destiny, and in doing so, they had sparked a fire in her that no betrayal could extinguish. For the first time, she realized that being cut out of their lives didn't mean the end. It was the beginning. The ember of revenge had begun to glow, but it was tempered by something stronger. The promise of a life built on her own terms. And in that promise, she allowed herself to hope. Elena's life had transformed in ways she had never imagined. The small apartment in the bustling city had become a home filled with warmth and laughter. Her career flourished, each success a quiet triumph over the family that had doubted her. She was no longer the invisible daughter, the overlooked sister. She was a woman who commanded respect, a woman who had carved out her own destiny with grit, intelligence, and an unshakable resolve. And James was by her side. Their love had grown steadily, not with the reckless fire of infatuation, but with a steady warmth that made her feel safe, valued, and cherished. James had a way of seeing her, not as someone defined by betrayal or loss, but as a woman full of ambition, kindness, and strength. They shared dreams, laughter, and quiet moments of contentment, and Elena realized that she had never truly felt this whole before. Yet, in the quiet of the night, Elena's mind often wandered back to her family. She had seen snippets of Sophia's wedding through social media, glittering dresses, flawless photos, and the applause of relatives who had once ignored her. And now Elena imagined the tables turned, a wedding so magnificent, so radiant, that her family could not help but feel the sting of comparison. But this revenge was not born of malice. It was born of justice, of showing that she had not only survived, but had thrived despite their cruelty. Elena began planning her own wedding with meticulous care. Every detail was designed to reflect her life now, sophisticated, elegant, and undeniably grand. Invitations went out to friends, colleagues, and, yes, her family. The moment they opened the envelopes, they would see her name in the most elegant script, attached to an event that radiated the success they had tried to deny her. As the date approached, Elena's heart swelled with a strange mixture of excitement and calm satisfaction. She imagined the expressions on their faces when they arrived, the surprise, the regret, the silent acknowledgement that the sister they had cast aside had become someone they could no longer ignore. But even in these moments, she felt no bitterness, only a serene pride. This was not about revenge in its cruelest sense. It was about reclaiming what had always been hers: dignity, joy, and love. The day of the wedding arrived, and Elena felt like she was stepping into a dream. Every element shimmered with perfection, a reflection of her journey from heartbreak to triumph. Guests marveled at the beauty of the event, the seamless coordination, and most importantly, the radiant bride at the center of it all. And then they came her family, faces pale, eyes wide, whispers caught in throats. Elena noticed the hesitation in her father's posture, the awkwardness in her mother's smile, the mix of awe and discomfort in Sophia's gaze. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself a small, private smile. They had underestimated her, excluded her, but now they were witnessing her rise. As she took James's hand at the altar, Elena realized that this was more than a wedding. It was a declaration. She had reclaimed her power, her happiness, and her life. The ember of revenge had become a blazing fire, but tempered by love, by self-worth, by triumph. And in that fire, Elena finally felt complete. The morning after the wedding, sunlight streamed through the grand windows of Elena's suite, dancing across the polished floors. The echoes of laughter, music, and heartfelt congratulations from the previous night still lingered in her mind, leaving her with a profound sense of peace. She turned to James, who was quietly sipping his coffee, his hand finding hers across the table. In his gaze, she saw the reflection of her own journey: loss, heartbreak, determination, and finally, triumph. Elena knew the time had come for one final step. The guests had gone, the celebrations had ended, but the chapter of her life that had begun with betrayal had not yet fully closed. She asked James to wait outside and picked up her phone, dialing the number she had avoided for months. Her father answered on the second ring, his voice cautious, as if he sensed the shift in her. "Dad," Elena began, steady and calm, "we need to talk." The conversation was awkward at first. Years of silence and unspoken resentment hung heavy between them. But Elena did not shout, did not plead, did not demand apologies. She simply spoke with clarity, recounting the hurt, the exclusion, and the profound disappointment she had felt. She allowed herself to voice the pain she had carried for so long, but also made it clear that she no longer needed their validation. "I've built a life of my own," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "One filled with love, respect, and happiness. I'm not here to beg for forgiveness or approval. I'm here to let you know I've moved forward." Her father's silence spoke volumes. He had expected anger, tears, perhaps even pleading, but Elena gave him none. She had taken the power they tried to steal and reclaimed it with grace. Sophia eventually found the courage to speak. "Elena, I'm sorry. I didn't understand," she murmured, her voice fragile. Elena listened, her heart softening slightly, but she did not cling to the apology. Some wounds, she realized, required acknowledgement but not dependence. She nodded gently, a silent acknowledgement of the past, and then she let it rest. With her family left to confront their own guilt and regret, Elena turned to the future she had fought to build. She and James walked through the city streets, hands intertwined, hearts light with freedom. They spoke of their plans, of travel, of home, of dreams that no longer had to be postponed or sacrificed. Every step was a reminder that life could be beautiful when built on one's own terms. Elena reflected on her journey, from the night she had cried alone in Sophia's garden to this morning, where sunlight illuminated not just the room, but the path she had walked. The ember of revenge had burned bright, yes, but it had never consumed her. It had guided her towards self-worth, independence, and love that was genuine. Sitting with James by the river that afternoon, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe fully. She was no longer the daughter overlooked, The sister ignored, the girl betrayed. She was a woman who had turned heartbreak into strength, betrayal into motivation, and loss into a life overflowing with love and joy. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Elena knew with certainty this was only the beginning. A life built on her own terms, filled with laughter, love, and triumph, stretched before her, and for the first time in years she felt unstoppable.